There are moments in life when the ground gives way beneath us, not because the world ended, but because something sacred was broken: trust. Infidelity shatters not only relationships but also identities. We question everything we knew about our partner, and perhaps more painfully, everything we knew about ourselves. Yet, amid the wreckage, the question that quietly lingers is this: once trust is broken, can it ever truly be healed? The answer is not simple, nor is it universal. Trust, like glass, doesn't return to its original shape. But it can be transformed, crafted into something new, something perhaps even stronger, though undeniably different. Healing begins when we resist the urge to define our story by blame alone. The betrayed partner deserves honesty, and the betrayer deserves responsibility, not condemnation. Respect is born in this fragile space, where we replace the impulse to punish with the courage to understand. Respect begins where judgment ends, because judgment, by its very nature, separates us from understanding. When trust is broken through infidelity, the first instinct is often to judge, to label one person as the villain and the other as the victim. While this reaction is deeply human, it can also prevent healing. Judgment simplifies a complex reality into moral categories, while respect requires us to sit in the discomfort of nuance. Betrayal doesn't occur in isolation. It emerges from unmet needs, unspoken desires, and emotional distances that have quietly grown over time. When we begin to understand this complexity, we create space for respect, not for the act of betrayal itself, but for the humanity of those involved. To understand without excusing, and to hold accountable without humiliating, is the foundation of emotional intelligence. Respect blooms when we can recognize the pain behind behavior rather than only the behavior itself. The betrayer, too, carries shame and confusion. Often, they struggle to reconcile the person they thought they were with the choices they made. The betrayed, meanwhile, wrestles with a loss of identity and safety. Both are confronted with their vulnerability, and both must navigate emotions that defy logic. When judgment is replaced with curiosity, the tone of the conversation changes. Curiosity says, "Help me understand how we got here," instead of "How could you do this?" That simple shift moves both partners from defensiveness to dialogue, and dialogue is where healing and respect can begin to re-emerge. Respect in the wake of betrayal does not mean condoning deceit, it means acknowledging that human beings are contradictory. We can love and hurt someone at the same time. We can crave stability and novelty, commitment and freedom, tenderness and excitement. When we accept that paradox, we approach each other with humility rather than superiority. Respect is an act of seeing another person's full humanity, including their flaws, impulses, and fears. It demands that we confront our own judgments too, the need to feel morally righteous, the desire to control, or the impulse to distance ourselves from what makes us uncomfortable. By suspending judgment, we not only make room for the other person to be seen, but we also make room for our own growth. We learn to hold complexity with grace. We recognize that trust, once broken, cannot be restored through punishment or shame. It requires mutual recognition. Respect is not a reward given to those who never fail, it's a practice of seeing beyond failure, of meeting the other person where their humanity is exposed, and choosing to understand rather than condemn. Healing trust after infidelity is not about returning to who you were before, it's about becoming someone new, individually and together. When betrayal strikes, many people long to rewind time, to go back to the version of the relationship that felt safe, predictable, and whole. But the truth is, once trust is broken, that version no longer exists. What has been lost cannot be restored in its old form, because both people are irrevocably changed by what happened. The process of healing is therefore not a return, but an evolution. It asks both partners to re-examine themselves, their needs, and their expectations of love. Healing becomes an act of reinvention rather than repair. In the aftermath of betrayal, the couple stands at a crossroads. One path leads to resentment, silence, and denial, a desperate attempt to pretend that nothing has changed. The other path, though far more difficult, leads to growth. It requires confronting uncomfortable truths about communication, emotional disconnection, and unmet desires that may have existed long before the affair. Healing trust means building something new from the rubble of what was lost, using honesty as the foundation and vulnerability as the mortar. The person who was betrayed must rediscover their strength and redefine what safety means to them, while the betrayer must learn to take accountability without drowning in shame. Both must grow into versions of themselves who can hold truth without fear and love without illusion. This process is deeply psychological because it mirrors the way humans adapt to trauma. After a fracture, the bone heals with new tissue that can become even stronger at the point of the break. In relationships, the same can be true. When both partners commit to self-reflection and emotional transparency, they can create a form of trust that is not naive but earned. It is trust that has seen darkness and survived it. However, this kind of healing requires courage, the courage to let go of the fantasy of what once was and to accept the uncertainty of what can be. Healing trust also involves recognizing that both people are changed, not just the one who was betrayed. The betrayer must rebuild their moral and emotional integrity, learning how to be trustworthy not through promises, but through consistent action. The betrayed must learn to balance vigilance with openness, skepticism with hope. Together, they must craft a new relational identity that honors the lessons of the past without being imprisoned by them. Healing, then, becomes a process of becoming, of transforming pain into wisdom, loss into renewal, and brokenness into the possibility of deeper connection. Vulnerability, when owned with dignity, commands more respect than perfection ever could. In the wake of betrayal, many people instinctively armor themselves against further pain. They hide behind anger, defensiveness, or emotional distance, believing that showing vulnerability makes them weak or foolish. Yet, true respect does not emerge from emotional control or appearances of strength, it arises when a person dares to stand in their truth with openness and grace. Vulnerability is not an act of surrender, it is an act of profound courage. It says, "I am wounded, but I am still here." In that honesty lies the kind of authenticity that invites connection, empathy, and respect. When trust has been broken, both the betrayed and the betrayer experience deep vulnerability. The betrayed partner often feels exposed, unsafe, and stripped of certainty, while the betrayer faces the vulnerability of guilt, shame, and the fear of rejection. Both are standing naked before the reality of what happened, their illusions shattered. It is tempting for each to hide, to retreat into pride, justification, or silence, but healing begins only when vulnerability is met with dignity. To speak one's truth without bitterness, to admit pain without self-pity, and to listen without defense, these are the acts that rebuild respect. Psychology shows that vulnerability strengthens relational bonds because it activates empathy. When someone owns their emotions honestly, it creates a space where the other person can respond with understanding instead of judgment. This kind of exchange humanizes both sides of betrayal. The one who was hurt begins to see that acknowledging pain is not weakness but strength, while the one who hurt learns that accountability can coexist with self-respect. Dignified vulnerability is about standing in the fullness of emotion, grief, anger, longing, without allowing it to consume or define you. It transforms raw emotion into meaningful communication. Perfection, on the other hand, breeds distance. When we strive to appear unshakable, we disconnect from our own humanity and from others. Respect does not come from perfection because perfection denies reality. It denies the messiness of love, the contradictions of desire, and the complexity of human behavior. Vulnerability, however, accepts those truths. It embraces imperfection as part of the human experience and finds strength in authenticity. When a person can say, "I am hurt, but I am still willing to engage," or "I made a mistake, but I am willing to make amends," they model emotional integrity. They show that dignity is not about being flawless but about being real. In relationships shattered by infidelity, it is this honesty, the willingness to be seen without armor, that slowly restores respect, not through control, but through the quiet power of truth. The way we handle broken trust mirrors how we relate to our own shame, guilt, and desire for redemption. When betrayal occurs, the emotional aftermath is not only about what happened between two people but also about what awakens within each of them. Infidelity exposes the parts of ourselves we often avoid, the capacity to hurt, to be selfish, to feel unworthy, or to fear abandonment. The betrayer is confronted by guilt, by the awareness that they have caused pain to someone they love, while the betrayed faces shame, questioning their own worth and wondering why they weren't enough. How each person moves through these emotions determines whether the wound festers or transforms into wisdom. Healing trust, then, becomes an inner process as much as a relational one. Shame, when unacknowledged, breeds defensiveness and distance. The person who betrayed may become trapped in self-loathing, deflecting responsibility or withdrawing in silence, unable to face the consequences of their actions. The betrayed may internalize shame, believing the infidelity reflects their own inadequacy. Both responses prevent healing because shame isolates, it tells us that we are unworthy of connection or understanding. Respect cannot exist in such isolation. But when individuals begin to confront their shame with honesty, they begin to reclaim their dignity. By acknowledging, "I did this, and I regret it," or "this happened to me, and I still have value," they begin to restore respect for themselves and invite it from others. Guilt, unlike shame, can be transformative when handled with self-awareness. Guilt reminds us that we crossed a moral boundary, but it also pushes us toward making amends. It can serve as a moral compass guiding us back to integrity, but only if we face it rather than bury it. When someone takes accountability without collapsing into self-contempt, they demonstrate emotional maturity. That kind of self-awareness evokes respect because it shows a willingness to learn rather than to hide. Similarly, when the person who was hurt allows themselves to feel their anger and grief without letting those emotions harden into bitterness, they demonstrate resilience and strength. At the core of all this is the desire for redemption, the human need to be seen not just for what we have done, but for what we are trying to become. Healing broken trust means allowing space for that redemption to unfold, without rushing or forcing it. It means seeing the other not only as the source of pain but as a fellow human being struggling to make sense of their flaws and failures. The process of confronting shame and guilt becomes a path toward self-respect, and from that self-respect, mutual respect can slowly begin to grow again. Respect is rekindled through accountability, emotional courage, and the willingness to confront truth without cruelty. When trust has been broken, both partners face a defining choice: whether to hide behind defensiveness or to step forward with honesty. Accountability is not simply admitting wrongdoing, it is the act of owning one's impact, recognizing how one's choices have affected another person's heart, and committing to change through consistent behavior. It requires integrity, to tell the truth not to ease guilt, but to rebuild safety. Accountability restores respect because it transforms remorse into responsibility. It shifts the narrative from "I'm sorry you feel hurt" to "I see how my actions hurt you, and I am here to repair what I broke." This is where healing begins to take a tangible shape. Emotional courage is the fuel that makes accountability possible. It takes immense bravery to stay present in the face of someone else's pain, to listen to anger and disappointment without retreating into self-defense. Likewise, it takes courage for the betrayed to speak their truth without cruelty, to express hurt, rage, and fear without letting those emotions destroy what little trust remains. Emotional courage is not loud, it is steady. It is the quiet strength of staying in the conversation when everything inside you wants to run or retaliate. When both people choose this courage, respect begins to return, not because the wound is gone, but because the truth is finally being honored. Confronting truth without cruelty is one of the hardest and most essential parts of rebuilding respect. After infidelity, truth often feels like a weapon, too painful to face, too raw to speak. Yet without truth, healing cannot take root. Truth, when delivered with compassion, becomes an instrument of clarity rather than punishment. It allows both partners to see the full picture: the betrayal, the emotional voids, the unmet needs, and the patterns that led them there. Cruelty, however, turns truth into a form of revenge, closing the door to empathy. Respect thrives when truth is spoken with accountability and received with openness. Rebuilding trust after betrayal is less about promises and more about actions that align with honesty. Accountability shows reliability, emotional courage shows sincerity, and compassion in truth-telling shows maturity. These elements together re-establish a foundation of respect that is no longer fragile or conditional. It becomes a respect grounded in reality, a respect that knows the cost of deception, the value of transparency, and the strength that comes from choosing truth, even when it trembles. When trust is broken, One of the deepest psychological needs that surfaces is the need for safety, emotional, physical, and relational. Yet safety cannot return through control, surveillance, or forced reassurance. It is rebuilt through consistency, transparency, and emotional presence. The sixth secret to earning respect after betrayal is understanding that safety is not given by words but earned by actions over time. Both partners must learn how to live with uncertainty while nurturing reliability. For the one who has betrayed, this means showing up every day in truth, without defensiveness or manipulation. For the one who was betrayed, it means daring to trust small gestures again, even when fear whispers that doing so is foolish. Respect grows in this delicate balance between fear and courage. The rebuilding of safety begins with predictability. Betrayal disrupts the emotional rhythm of a relationship. What once felt secure now feels unstable and foreign. To regain respect, both people must create new rituals of trust. This could mean openness about communication, being honest about emotional triggers, or following through on commitments, no matter how small. Each consistent act becomes a brick in the new foundation of safety. The process is slow because genuine security cannot be rushed, it must be proven, not promised. The betrayer earns respect not by grand declarations of love but through quiet, steady accountability. The betrayed reclaims self-respect by setting boundaries that protect their emotional well-being without closing their heart entirely. Safety also involves emotional availability. After infidelity, many couples focus on behavior, checking phones, controlling time, asking for constant updates, but real security comes from emotional connection. It is about being fully present in moments of discomfort, listening deeply, and responding with empathy instead of defensiveness. When both people practice this kind of emotional presence, respect naturally follows. The betrayed begins to feel seen and valued, and the betrayer begins to rebuild integrity by demonstrating empathy and reliability. These repeated emotional exchanges slowly rewire the nervous system, teaching both partners that safety is possible again, not through control but through trust that grows organically. Psychologically, the re-establishment of safety mirrors the process of healing trauma. It requires patience, gentleness, and the willingness to stay with discomfort without seeking immediate relief. Respect is not born from avoiding pain but from facing it with steadiness. Over time, the relationship can evolve into something wiser, one where both individuals respect not only each other's vulnerability but also their own capacity for resilience. Safety, then, becomes the soil from which new trust can grow, watered by truth, nurtured by consistency, and illuminated by compassion. Forgiveness after betrayal is often misunderstood as absolution, but true forgiveness is a psychological and emotional process that reclaims personal power. It is not about forgetting or minimizing the hurt, nor does it mean condoning the betrayal. Instead, it is a conscious choice to release the grip that resentment has on one's emotional life. When trust has been broken, anger and bitterness can easily become prisons that trap both the betrayed and the betrayer. Forgiveness becomes an act of liberation, an inner decision to stop letting the wound define one's identity. This form of forgiveness is not passive, it requires courage, self-awareness, and a willingness to face the pain without allowing it to consume one's sense of self. For the person who has been betrayed, forgiveness begins with acknowledging the full extent of the hurt. It is impossible to forgive what one has not first faced honestly. Suppressed anger and unspoken grief only deepen the wound. By naming the betrayal, expressing its emotional impact, and allowing the pain to be witnessed, the betrayed begins to reclaim agency over their own narrative. This reclamation is a key part of respect, self-respect born from refusing to let another person's choices dictate one's worth. Forgiveness then becomes less about reconciling with the other person and more about restoring inner peace. It allows space for emotional clarity and makes future trust, whether in the same relationship or another, possible again. For the one who committed the betrayal, forgiveness requires accountability and humility. Seeking forgiveness is not an entitlement but a responsibility. It means acknowledging the pain caused without demanding that the other person move on before they are ready. True remorse is not about easing one's guilt but about making space for the other person's experience to exist fully. Respect from the betrayed can only return when the betrayer stops defending their choices and begins understanding their consequences. Forgiveness, when it eventually comes, becomes a mutual process of recognition of both the harm done and the humanity shared. In psychological terms, forgiveness is a process of integration. It transforms chaos into coherence, pain into meaning. It does not erase memory but changes the emotional weight of it. Over time, forgiveness helps both individuals detach from the identity of betrayer and betrayed and instead see themselves as people capable of growth. It allows for the rebuilding of respect, not because the past is undone, but because both have learned to honor the complexity of human imperfection with empathy and emotional maturity. Intimacy after betrayal requires a redefinition of closeness, one that goes beyond physical connection and dives into emotional transparency. When infidelity occurs, the sense of intimacy that once felt effortless often collapses under the weight of secrecy and distrust. What was once a safe space now feels like a battlefield, filled with questions, doubts, and fears. Yet paradoxically, it is through rebuilding intimacy that healing truly begins. Intimacy is not about returning to the same level of comfort as before but about learning to be vulnerable again in a new way. It requires both partners to engage with truth not as a weapon, but as a bridge. After betrayal, physical closeness can feel confusing or even impossible because the body remembers pain as much as the mind does. Rebuilding intimacy starts with emotional safety, with creating moments where honesty can exist without punishment. This may begin with small gestures, a shared conversation without defensiveness, a moment of empathy, or a willingness to sit together in discomfort without withdrawing. Each of these actions slowly rebuilds a sense of connection that feels genuine, not forced. Intimacy becomes less about passion and more about presence, less about seduction and more about sincerity. When both partners can look at each other not as enemies but as two people navigating their shared fragility, respect begins to grow again. True intimacy also means letting go of the illusion of perfect love. Infidelity often exposes the myth that love must always feel secure or that passion guarantees loyalty. Real intimacy accepts uncertainty and embraces imperfection. It allows for emotional honesty, where both partners can express their fears, desires, and boundaries without shame. This openness requires courage, for it means showing up without the protective masks of blame or self-righteousness. When partners choose to reveal rather than hide, they create a space where mutual respect can thrive, a space where connection is chosen, not assumed. From a psychological standpoint, intimacy after betrayal mirrors the process of rebuilding trust. It grows slowly, through consistency and emotional responsiveness. Small, genuine interactions accumulate into a sense of reliability. Over time, this emotional closeness can even deepen the bond, because it is no longer built on illusion but on the shared truth of having faced pain together. Intimacy becomes an act of mutual witnessing, seeing each other's wounds, regrets, and hopes without turning away. In that shared vulnerability, the relationship may not return to what it was, but it can evolve into something far more authentic, where respect and love coexist with a profound understanding of what it means to be human. Communication after betrayal becomes the lifeline through which respect and understanding are rebuilt. When infidelity enters a relationship, silence, defensiveness, and emotional withdrawal often take its place. The betrayed partner may fear asking questions that could reopen wounds, while the betrayer may avoid speaking out of guilt or fear of further conflict. Yet the absence of honest communication only deepens the divide. Healing begins when both partners dare to speak truthfully, not to accuse or justify, but to be seen and understood. Communication becomes the bridge between pain and possibility. It is the way two people begin to rewrite the story of their relationship with honesty and intention. The first step toward meaningful communication is emotional regulation. Betrayal triggers intense emotions, rage, sadness, shame, and confusion, and these can easily turn dialogue into destruction. Respectful communication requires the capacity to pause, breathe, and speak from self-awareness rather than reactivity. It's about expressing feelings without turning them into weapons. Instead of "you destroyed everything," one might say, "I feel lost and need to understand what happened." This shift in language transforms accusation into curiosity and defense into empathy. It invites listening instead of resistance. The more both people can stay grounded in their truth without trying to dominate the other's experience, the more genuine respect begins to return. Listening is the most powerful act of communication after betrayal. To truly listen, to stay present without interrupting, judging, or preparing a response, is to acknowledge the other person's humanity. The betrayed needs to feel heard, not corrected. The betrayer needs to be allowed to explain, not excused but understood. This process is uncomfortable, even painful, because truth often carries emotional weight. But silence breeds resentment, while dialogue creates clarity. Communication becomes the container where emotions can exist safely, without fear of explosion or avoidance. Psychologically, transparent communication helps rebuild a sense of coherence. Infidelity shatters the narrative of the relationship. Through open conversation, both partners begin to piece together a shared understanding of what went wrong and what can be different moving forward. Respect grows when each person's perspective is honored, even if agreement isn't always possible. In time, communication evolves from a survival tool into a sign of emotional maturity. It becomes a practice of truth-telling with compassion, a reminder that love is not sustained by perfection but by the willingness to keep talking, to keep listening, and to keep showing up even when the words are hard to say. Through this ongoing dialogue, respect finds its voice again, carried by honesty and the courage to be real. The final secret to rebuilding respect after betrayal lies in embracing growth as the ultimate goal rather than restoration. Infidelity marks a breaking point, but it can also become a turning point, a moment that challenges both individuals to evolve beyond who they were before. Many couples approach healing with the hope of returning to what once was, but true healing asks for something deeper: transformation. Growth means learning from the pain, integrating the lessons, and choosing to live with greater self-awareness and emotional integrity. It means recognizing that while the relationship may never be the same, it can become more authentic, more conscious, and more resilient if both partners are willing to do the work. Growth begins with self-reflection. The betrayed partner often has to rediscover their voice, their boundaries, and their sense of self-worth, while the betrayer must confront the reasons behind their actions, understanding not just what they did, but why. This introspection requires honesty and humility, qualities that anchor respect. When individuals commit to understanding their emotional patterns, they begin to communicate with greater depth and empathy. This personal evolution transforms pain into wisdom, teaching both partners what kind of love they wish to give and receive. The relationship may survive or end, but in either case, growth ensures that the experience becomes meaningful rather than merely destructive. Embracing growth also means accepting uncertainty. Healing after betrayal does not come with guarantees. It unfolds in layers, with progress and setbacks intertwined. Respect develops when both people can tolerate that uncertainty with patience rather than control. The betrayed learns to trust their intuition again, while the betrayer learns to earn trust through consistent, transparent behavior. Together, they begin to see the relationship not as broken beyond repair, but as something evolving, a dynamic space where both can become more emotionally intelligent and self-aware. Growth, in this context, is not just relational but existential. It deepens one's understanding of love, loss, and the human capacity to heal. Psychologically, choosing growth transforms betrayal from a trauma into a teacher. It invites forgiveness, empathy, and accountability without denying the reality of pain. It teaches both partners that respect is not static, it expands with awareness and honesty. When individuals commit to growth, they no longer define themselves by the betrayal but by how they rise from it. The relationship that emerges, whether continued or ended, carries a deeper sense of integrity. It reflects two people who have learned to respect not just each other, but themselves, people who understand that from brokenness can come not just survival, but profound transformation.